I think he told me one of his famous jokes. When I was like, I got to come to this home group. I'm Lisa. I'm an alcoholic. It's been a minute since I've given my lead, so we'll see how this goes, right? I prayed in the bathroom before we started, so God's in charge. But yeah, I'm an alcoholic. I got sober in 2013. April 14th, and I have a sponsor, and I sponsor people, and I have a home group. This is my home group, and I say that because it's all really important to keeping me in AA and like in the book, and being like a free, sane person, and like the promises that we hear about in the big book. There was a period of time in my sobriety where I like didn't have those things, and actually the only thing I was doing was volunteering. Where'd Eric go? Volunteering at central office, because I just moved here, and so maybe I'll touch on that later. But there was a period of time where like I didn't have that stuff, and my world got really dark, and it was like not great to not be involved in AA. And so yeah, well, what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. I didn't start drinking like really alcoholically until probably late college, or really even after college age for me. So leading up to that, like, I don't know, there's things, right? Like I didn't ever really feel comfortable in my own skin, but I didn't really know that was different. I didn't know like being okay in your own skin was like a possibility, that people lived like that. And so, I don't know, I was just doing the best I could. And I went to school because that's what my family did, that's what my brothers did, that was expected of me. And like, that was like, not school, but I think like a big part of, I really thought that my family had these like expectations of me and like this box I had to fit in, and then so I was always trying to like be somebody else than who I really was. And maybe it wasn't that far off, but it's not comfortable, right? To try to like do things a certain way in order to make like others happy, and like you're not really happy in yourself. And so I kind of was uncomfortable in life in that way for a while, and I went to a school that was the farthest away from my family that I could get in, still be in the state, because I needed to go to a state school because tuition, and and so I went there, and I drank like a kind of stereotypical college kid drinks. Lots of weekend parties, you know, some weeknights, there's like specials at the pubs, and nothing really stuck out that, like, I didn't immediately have a drink and think, this is gonna change my life. And it wasn't until after college that I started to like use alcohol as a solution. And obviously I have different language to talk about it now after being in AA for a minute, but like, it really was like, in the big book, I don't remember pages, so sorry, I'm like not one of those people that memorizes it, but it talks about eventually like our troubles pile up on us and become like increasingly harder to deal with until we like can't get out from underneath them. And that's what it really like felt like to me, and with my drinking too. And so that was kind of the beginning. Like, it really did, I had fun, right? Like, I had a good time drinking alcohol. It was social, and then it wasn't social, and then I still had fun because I didn't care. Like, that's what I wanted to be doing. And so right after college, I felt like I could finally do what I wanted. Like, I didn't have anybody telling me what to do. My parents weren't. They were still taking care of me, honestly. Like, this is a program of honesty, but I felt like I wasn't under their thumb anymore because I wasn't in school and they weren't like providing me with that way. So I was like, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And it turns out I just wanted to drink all the time. You know, that was like the only time I felt okay. And I didn't realize that for a while, but I would say pretty quickly it went from like drinking at like weekend nights to like every night, like every day after work and then at night, and it just really like piled up, and I'm like the alcoholic who was drinking daily, and like it got to the point where I would like wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I would stop and find it wherever my bottle of booze was and like take a couple shots to go back to bed. And so drinking like that in that amount doesn't necessarily make me an alcoholic, but that is what my drinking looked like. I hid bottles. I lost jobs because I showed up drunk, or got drunk at work because I had like bottles in the toilet tanks, or like bottles in my lock, bottles like of vodka, but it was just in a Mountain Dew bottle, and I thought no one would know, and I would just like set that on like the community employee like drink shelf, you know, and run in the back and like I think they knew. I think they just didn't want to train another minimum wage employee. But yeah, things started to get pretty dark, right? Like nothing was working out for me. And this kind of thinking and this kind of stuff shows up in my inventory, where I like really have a sense of entitlement, and like it's like entitlement, and it's like also self-pity. Like, how dare I have to work as hard as everybody else, like to get these things? Like, I wish you would just like leave me alone. And that's really like was my like delusion, like dream job. And like sometimes when we talk about like what would it look like if I were to go back out, and it's like it's always been to have like a lifetime supply of like whiskey and like live in the woods, and like no one would see me or hear from me again, you know, and just be alone. So yeah, obviously I had not a job that I loved and wanted to go anywhere with, but I was doing that and drinking all the time, and it just got to be less and less fun. And I got to this part where like I just couldn't fix anything, you know. And I remember like smoking a cigarette with my like handle of vodka, being like, you know, I just got to get my shit together. And it, you know, like it never happened. It never happened for me. Like I really thought it would just happen, like, right? I don't know. And so I was in this like, I was driving everywhere, and I got pulled over. It was my second DWI. So I started to have legal consequences, and that's really what got me into like treatment and like AA, and like people being like, you're an alcoholic. And for a while, you know, like at least a year, I was fine with that. Like, okay, fine, I'm an alcoholic. Like, and I was just trying to jump through hoops to like not get in trouble anymore, but still drinking. And so I used to talk about that like relapse, like I was like relapsing because I would get like 2 weeks of like not drinking to like not get in trouble, and then I would like drink again and be like, oh, I relapsed again. But that's not the way I look at it. That's not real sobriety, right? Like I just was like not drinking to like pass a P test. And so I couldn't not drink, right? I had gotten to this point where I really wanted to stop, right? Because I kept getting in trouble with probation, and couldn't get a job anymore, and things like that. And I really wanted to stop, and that's when I found out that I like could not stop. And that's when I like I really started to try, and I still struggled to like not drink for another like couple years. I went to AA meetings because the judge said I should, and I pretty quickly found out that I could just sign the slip myself because we're anonymous, and so I stopped going to AA meetings because it's weird. And people told me, people carried the message there. They were good meetings, and people said, get a sponsor, go through the books, and people shared their stories. And I just wasn't done yet, I think. I just wanted my life to be golden, and I didn't want to do any work, and I wanted to be able to drink while I was doing that, because that's the only thing that like made me feel like I could like breathe in this world. And so, I struggled like a lot of us do. And, I did all the other treatments. And they didn't work for me. I think it was like, I think it was a good effort, but they didn't work for me. Like I learned a lot, but that's the thing, like in and of myself, like I can't stop drinking on my own. And so, let's fast forward. I violated my probation, got resentenced, went to prison, got out, and was like, I for sure am not drinking anymore, right? Like I was in there for 8 or 9 months, I think. And I was like, I am not drinking anymore, like that's for sure. And I don't know how long it took, but it was pretty quickly that like I really I lost my mind. I had been paroled to my parents' house, and my parents are normal drinkers. They're not alcoholics, and I was living with them, and they had gotten rid of all the booze in the house because I'm on parole and it can't be in the house. And they were like, that's great. And they just got rid of it. And I remember staying there and like being so uncomfortable. I couldn't sleep at night and just like rocking, like feeling like I was like crawling out of my skin. And I came up with this plan, right? Like if I could just get a bottle, like I could just have like a nightcap and I could sleep, right? And I could breathe. And like nowhere in my drinking experience have I ever just had like one drink and like gone to bed. But I really thought that is what was gonna happen. And so I'm at my parents' house and like they're at work and I'm like searching the house, which is like insane because they're not alcoholics. So they're just like gonna get rid of the booze, like they don't need it somewhere. And I'm lived in this old farmhouse and the basement's not finished, right? And there's like an old cistern back there and there's no way into it. It's just like a half wall. And I remember even like climbing into that thinking my mom like hid the booze like in the basement. But my mom's like 5'3" and she had like just had a hip replacement and like she's not like hiding booze in the basement. But like I needed to like find something, and I found a way, and I drank again, and I knew when like the last time I drank, as soon as that like bottle hit my lips, like I felt better before the alcohol even got into my system, like such an immense like sense of relief. And I also knew finally after like 3 years that like it was never gonna stop. That I was not a normal drinker. This is not how my brothers feel when they drink, and that I was never gonna not be able to do it. And I put it away because I was, supposed to have things to do with the family, and I went back and had some more, and then I hid it away again, and I got drunk because I have no power over it once I take that first drink, and that was the last time I drank. My mom came home and knew something was up, and it was very sweet and asked me, and we sat in the bed and I cried, and but like I heard a speaker describe it as like a deep knowing that like I was an alcoholic, and that was like that moment for me, and that sucked. It sucked pretty bad. It was not good, right? And leading up to that, those years drinking leading up to that point, I had plenty of nights where like I didn't want to wake up. There was like a lot of nights where I just didn't want to wake up anymore. Like I just didn't want to do life. And that's what like the end of my drinking was like for like a couple years. And so I ended up in a halfway house because, like, I guess we're talking about like self-supporting stuff tonight, but after I drank that last time at my parents', I was at my counselor's office and was like telling her, she's like, well, I think you would do really well in this house. It's up in the city. You can be around your peers and like you can go back to school and like also like take yourself to meetings and stuff, because my parents lived like in farm country, and so there's not really like any meetings around. I really didn't want to like go to a halfway house. I thought there was like a stigma with it, and I was like, I can't do that. But you know, I had just gotten out of prison, and I still didn't like want to be judged for going to a halfway house, which doesn't make any sense. But she was like kind, but also was like, yeah, you're 28, like your parents don't have to take care of you anymore. And I was like, oh shit, yeah. You know, and so that didn't feel good to realize that I didn't have a plan for getting out of the situation I was in. And so I went to that halfway house in Rochester in New York, and I started going to meetings and doing all the stuff. And I came home one day, and one of the women that was working there was an older lady, and she had been sober a lot of years, I don't know. But she asked me how I was doing. And I said, like, I don't know, like, I'm okay, but I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because I always drink again, even when I don't want to. And so I kind of just was, like, waiting for it to happen. Because I had experiences where I was trying to stop drinking, and I would leave the house to go grocery shopping, or I would leave the house to go to a meeting, and I would end up at the liquor store. And, like, I could tell you physically how I got there, but I couldn't really tell you how I got there, or how I ended up buying booze, or like how I ended up in that position again. And it talks about that in our big book too. Like, oftentimes the alcoholic will, like, if you ask him why he's drinking again, like, will have excuses. Something good had happened, something bad happened, but like, really, if he's honest with himself, he has no idea why he drank again. And like that stuff, like, I could relate to. And so this woman said, did you ever think you could be okay? And that like blew my mind, because I had never felt like okay. So that was kind of life-changing for me. And then she pulled out a meeting list and asked me if I had a sponsor, and I said no, and she circled a bunch of women's meetings for me to go to, and like encouraged me to go get a sponsor. And so I did. I got a sponsor. This woman stood up in a meeting and talked about how when she stopped drinking, her life didn't get better. Because everyone's like, oh, if you just stop drinking, right? Like, you got to stop drinking. Like, that's your problem, right? And for me and for most alcoholics, when we stop drinking, life does not get better. It gets worse, because we like no longer have a solution to handle life. And like we end up, you know, wanting to die or drinking again. And like that was my experience. So like when I stopped drinking, like life became almost unbearable. And so she stood up and talked about that, and then talked about getting a sponsor and like relying on a God that worked for her in her daily life, like as a result of working the steps. And I was like, whatever. Whatever works, right? I came in with the desperation we talk about in the big book. And so I asked her to be my sponsor. She sponsored me, and like absolutely going through the big book and doing Alcoholics Anonymous has like saved my life for sure. I didn't want to make it, right? Like I wasn't going to make it, and I didn't want to make it. And like AA changed that for me. And I started going to that woman's home group, and there was all these women and home group members, and like a real home group where we laughed together. And I remember going out to eat with them like one of the first times, and they just like drug me along, right? Like I just get to go where they take me. They put me in the car, and just like sitting around this big tables at like a Chili's, and they are just like ripping into each other and laughing, and like they're all sober, and we're like out late, and I was like slightly uncomfortable because I didn't know how to socialize at the time. But that was like my introduction to like the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And like many of those women, like I still talk to and like have showed up later in sobriety for me when I like hit rough patches. And it's like, it's really cool. And so, I think my first step coming into AA was super easy for me. When I sat down with that first sponsor, I had all the outside consequences to show me that my life was unmanageable, but like I had also been trying to stop drinking for like 3 years and it wasn't working. And so like that powerlessness, and like the example of that powerlessness looks like me leaving to go to the grocery store and ending up behind a dumpster, behind a liquor store with a bottle of booze because like I can't do and there's just no reason for it. And that's what like powerlessness over alcohol looks like to me, like the drinking. And my first sponsor and those women, hearing them talk about God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and what it's like done in their lives gave me hope, right? Like, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And I heard about these women, like, man, some of their stories, like, are just, it's like people say AA is like the greatest show on earth, and it really is, because like we really do have the best stories. Mike's got really good stories. But yeah, and so doing the first couple steps was not hard for me. Believing in God was fine. I didn't really they told me what to do, and I was willing to do it. And I think I kind of always maybe believed in something, but I wasn't really sure. And so making a God that of my own understanding that worked for me, that concept for myself has obviously grown and changed as my life has grown and changed, and how I rely on it and what I've needed has grown. But I didn't have a hard time with that. Who cares if it's real or not? This thing is actually working for these people, and they have real productive lives and are real members of their families and are not assholes, and they don't want to kill themselves every day, and that's pretty cool. And then I remember doing step 3, and right around the time I was doing step 3, and my sponsor had this thing where I always had to call 3 people, whatever step we were on, and ask them what their experience was with it. And I remember right around that time too, everyone in my home group was going to this service assembly. It was Narasa, and I got put in the jump seat of someone's car, and I slept on the floor of a hotel room. And that was my first conference, was a service assembly. Not a fun fellowship conference, but my first conference was a service assembly. And I still had the best time. There was still an ice cream social. I went to all the GSR panels because that was the level I was at. And then something happened in the group socially, and I ended up in a different car on the ride home. And I remember it was this dude's Honda Element, and if you've been inside one of those, they're really wide open and couches, and you can just lay them back. And so I'm laid back, and we have hours, I think 6 or 7 hour drive, and all they played was the oldest speaker tapes I have ever, still to this day, I have ever heard. and I don't know, I loved that was my first beginning experience in AA. Was these guys that were so on fire for it, and we were listening to speaker tapes for 6 and 7 hours, and listening about it was someone telling the story about the full story about the last bender that Bill and Abby went on, where they took the plane and landed somewhere, and I don't even remember all the details now because it's been so long, but that's the stuff we were listening to, and it's just crazy. But these people took me in and showed me how to do AA, and took me through the big book. But I was on step 3 during that conference weekend, and I remember when I got home that I was thinking about it, and I noticed a change. I think that was kind of my first spiritual experience, right? I realized that step 3 was like this like suit up and show up step, and I didn't have to worry about the expectations or the outcomes anymore. And that's what really like crushed me before, was always trying to like perform for somebody else. Like I didn't know myself to be true. I didn't know my own heart, and like to even have like a relationship with God. And so like doing step 3 to start this relationship with God, and then realizing that like nothing was in my power, like I just had to do the next right thing, was such like a weight off my chest that yeah, man, it was so cool. It like changed my life. And yeah, and so step 4, my first inventory, is a lot of resentments as you do, and also a lot of fears. That's what like my inventories tend to be. But the inventory, like I've since learned, is like such a great tool for me, because I can't see myself clearly most of the time. And having an inventory and like going over it with a sponsor really shines a light on things where, like, I remember, I think it was like my second time through the steps, and I had some old resentments on there from childhood about like sexism, and like, so I'm the only girl, and I'm the only girl, and I'm the youngest, and I have 2 older brothers, and I always really felt like burned because like they got to do the cool stuff because they were boys, and there's some validity to like them getting different things because they were boys, and I just always, didn't feel like that was right. Like we should all be treated the same. But my sponsor shined some light on that, and like, what did I get because I was the girl? And like, I got a lot of leeway because I was the baby and because I was a girl. And like, it was, one of the things was, so we used to have cows, and we had cows, and they would have babies every spring. And one time my dad gave one of my brothers a steer, and he got to take the steer and sell it at the auction. And I didn't get a steer ever in my life. And like, I felt really, really snubbed by that, and I thought it was because I was a girl, and like, and my sponsor did the same thing that Erin just did. She could not stop laughing, and I was like, this is seriously, like, I didn't get what I thought I deserved, and yeah, she just laughed at me, and she's like, this is my favorite like 4-step ever. that there's a cow story in here. And that got me to laugh about it and like relieve some of that pressure. And then I got to take like a pulled back version and like look at my childhood and see where I really was like lucky, right? I did really have a good childhood. No, I didn't get a steer, but like it really wasn't as unfair as I thought it was. And so like that's like something that a 4th and 5th step can do for you, and make you be able to be around your family, because they have no idea that I'm mad about that cow, So like, and so it allows me to show up and be around my brothers, and like they had nothing to do with it either, and like I get to just show up and like be a member of the family, which is like pretty cool. And like steps 8 and 9, that's real action that you can take that makes you feel like, right, like self-worth and self-esteem. I think Kathy said it, like, trust God, clean house, and help others. And like, when you clean up your side of the street, like, it really allows you to like look the world in the eye and like walk with your head up. And like, I didn't have that before. And honestly, my first couple of years in sobriety, like, I had a hard time being assertive, and I'm like really quiet in nature, and it's something I like worked hard at my first few years of sobriety, was like being able to have a voice. And like, at one point I swang too far, over the spectrum, and like, and now, and now I feel pretty comfortable. Sometimes I still have to work up the courage to say like, hey, that hurt my feelings, or something like that. But like, that was never something I could do before. I would, one, not notice it until like 4 days later, and then I would like think about it, and I would just think about it for weeks and be like, man, if I always say this next time I see this person, I'm going to say all this stuff to him. And like, I never did. But it was just like, that's the kind of resentment stuff that they talk about in the book that like will lead us out, right? Because it makes us so uncomfortable and we can't fix it. And then it starts being everyone else's fault. And there's like, and I have no power in my own life, which is not true. And so like doing steps 8 and 9, like allowed me to like pick my head up and like, I can say my truth and it's fine whether you like it or not. And that was really hard for me to get to that point. And then, 10, 11, and 12, like this daily practice, sometimes I feel real connected to God, and like it's really cool sitting on my little back steps with a cup of coffee, and like you can see the mountains, like being out here in Utah. Some mornings I'm just like overwhelmed with gratitude. I'm like, this is crazy that like I'm alive and I'm out here, and like, and then other mornings I sit out there and I'm just like, cool, all right. And then I do the prayers anyways, and I go about my day, and like I don't feel super connected, and that's okay as long as I'm doing it, as long as I'm doing the work. So yeah, that's kind of like how AA's helped me. I like briefly touched on when I moved here, I had like 4 years of sobriety, 5 years of sobriety, 4. That doesn't matter. Leading up to moving, right, I had this really strong home group, and we were really involved in service, and I had gotten really involved in young people's AA, which was like amazing. It was like frosting on the cake for me, for my experience in AA. Like it allowed me to like do and see a lot of things that I wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity to go and see. And so when I moved, I thought, I know how to do AA. And then I got here, and most of the meetings I went to, I didn't like. This is very judgy. And then people would sing like the happy birthday song, and I would like lose my mind. Like it took all I had to not walk out of that meeting. And then also at the same time, it was my first time in my life where I like had my own place that had like Wi-Fi and a couch. And so like I went to work, and then I had Netflix, and I had a girlfriend, and like, yeah, I don't really want to go to that meeting. They're not talking about AA anyways. What do I need that for? And so like I really slowly stopped going to meetings, right? And I also didn't have a sponsor, and I didn't have a home group. And I just had like this one like service position at central office, so I could convince myself that I was still doing AA because I knew I needed to. I was convinced when I went through the big book the first time, fully convinced that I was like an alcoholic, and that this was the only way. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I just didn't think about it and just kind of like let it slide off. And I ended up almost 2 years later, a year and a half later, in a spot where I was like waking up, and I just like couldn't. I was like, what's the point? Like, what am I even doing here? Like here on earth? Like, why am I still waking up? Like, what's the point? And then I started doing things like, maybe if I go to the gym more, maybe if I get a different job, or this relationship sucks. Maybe if I get a different girlfriend, like, and I just was like running around chaotically, trying to do a bunch of different things to make myself feel better like I did before. And I couldn't see it, right? Like I couldn't see that I was disconnected from God, that I wasn't like, that I was just being so self-seeking, that I was like, also like, not a terrible partner, because like I've been a terrible partner, but like I wasn't really in that relationship. I thought I was doing the best I could, but like I wasn't. And so something, I don't know what it was bad enough where I thought maybe I should do AA again, you know? And I called one of those guys from my first home group, and he had, you know, a lot more years of sobriety than me, and like I had never crossed this part of sobriety before. And he just kind of laughed, and he was like, yeah, we usually like hit that if we stop doing AA, and like there's a time period, but you may or may not hit it if you just keep doing AA. You may never feel this way, I don't know. But yeah, so, you know, like 5-6 years. And he was also said that like, it's funny, the longer we stay sober, our tolerance for pain goes up, or goes lower, right? Like we can not tolerate the same amount of pain that we were in when we were drinking, because we had like booze to like shield us from that. And so like the more sober I am, like the more I want to put action in, like as soon as I feel uncomfortable, right? Like I can be uncomfortable for a while, and then I'm like, okay, now I'll do something. And like that being uncomfortable for a while just kind of like gets shorter, like the longer I'm sober, because I've experienced like having like freedom and serenity and like peace in my life. And so I was like, oh man, like I've been uncomfortable for a minute and just like not willing to talk to myself about it. And so luckily I did have that service position, and I knew there was a group that they had to talk about AA because they had a concept meeting. And so I started coming to this home group, and I heard some of the women share, like, not like this, but like we do a step study or like step topics. And they really spoke like language of the heart to me. And so I found a sponsor here. I found a really great fellowship here, and they stuck with me through a lot of tears when I came back. Like I thought my life was a mess. Maybe it was, but I was probably fine. And I'm super grateful for that. And I think that like I think you can always find your people in AA. Like if I were to move again, I think you can always find your people in AA, right? There's like a lot of us. There's a lot of meetings here. And so like it continues to save my life, and it, you know, some of the simple things, right? Like do the next, what's the next right thing, right? Or, right, go help somebody else, like talk to somebody. Those are things that I could never do before. I was so like in my own little world that I wasn't like able to do that stuff. And like I've learned how to be like the person, you know, some version of the person that I like wanted to be, right? Like being able to be like a good friend and like a good family member. And I've learned it like through doing AA and through trial and error. And like, you know, with the help of God, like I really leaned into that faith when I came back. And I feel like it like deepened my reliance on a higher power. And you know, like I walked through, it was a really hard time for me. And so I'm really grateful for AA for that. And I think I was going to say something else, but I can't remember. So I'll just like end with that. Thank you guys for being here.